Yeah, muted. Yay! How are we doing? Right?
Yes, we just finished a power cut in time to make some dinner.
Oh, right, a power cut. Blimey. So have you had meals by candlelight?
Well, we couldn't actually have a meal because we have an electric cooker.
Aha, okay. Dear.
So we waited till the power was back on, eating crisps, and then had a meal.
Goodness. Does that happen quite often, or is that like a one-off? Or...
No, it's not that common.
Oh, that's good. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sleep time.
Oh, bless you. Yeah, nice weekend now to catch up. Stay with me for a few more minutes. Please.
What will you give me?
Extra hugs when I next see you.
Extra hugs.
Extra hugs. I think I already owe you about 3. So
3? You owe me at least 300.
Okay. Happy to give those. Oh. What are your fantastic plans for the weekend?
It's EMF tomorrow.
It totally is. Are you coming? Yeah.
Yes.
Yay! I didn't know you were coming. That's fabulous. Yeah.
I'll see how I do. I've been to a couple of online dance things and got super emotional and had to drop out.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So the Gather platform is just so cute. I love it. I was testing it the other day for them. It's just really sweet how it's been built. I just love it. Like the cutest little 16-bit RPG game you've ever played. That's really sweet. And yeah, all the lovely people are doing other wonderful things. So you got Laura. Hello, hey Kitty.
I'm Kitty.
So Laura's doing a kind of a speed datey, chatty, relatey thing, which sounds super cute. Yeah.
I love your positivity.
I love you.
I love you too.
Yeah.
I'm just extremely pessimistic.
Oh, well, hopefully I can give you a bit of my optimism. How are you, Kitty?
We've been joined by a very large Christmas pudding.
Hello. I can't hear you super well. Just a second.
That's okay.
Oh, Frankie.
Hello.
Hello.
That's a new colour. Is that coral?
It's orange. What do you think?
I think it's fabulous.
Thank you so much.
I really love it. Yeah.
Thank you very much. For a second, I thought you meant my face. I've been dancing quite hard till about 10 seconds ago. So I'm a bit like red and sweaty.
That's wonderful.
So this is also a new colour.
Frankie, thank you so much for my wonderful gift.
Oh, you're so welcome, my love. I'm glad you like it. I thought I would send it to you.
It's so kind of you.
What? Hello.
Oh, it's a Lisa. We've got a Lisa. Yay!
We got a Lisa.
Yay! Hey, Lisa.
Hi.
Yes,
Can you hear me?
Yeah! Yay!
Amazing.
Lisa, you look beautiful. You got lipstick on.
No, it's lip balm.
Oh, you work in it. You look incredible.
Why, thank you. It's the fluorescent lighting in my beautiful new abode.
Yeah, it's doing good things for you, man.
Great. It's so nice to see you.
I was just about to say, it's so nice to see you. Oh.
So nice to see you too, sweetie.
Thank you so much for coming.
Oh,
Love you lots, Lisa.
Have you installed any shelves in your new abode yet?
No, I'm not allowed. I don't think I could even bring power tools in here without being spotted.
Oh,
I mean, you can be super sneaky when you want to be.
Yeah, that is true.
That is true.
And you have an excuse to have suspicious bulges under your clothing.
The problem is the suspicious bulges borders are already very bulgy. I don't think I can put anything else in there without it looking quite concerning.
Hi, Van. Who else have we got? I don't know who maleyehuda.com is. Mike, is that you?
Of course it is.
Of course it is. Of course it is. Hello, Susie. Hello, Susie. And hello, Nick and Katie. How was your dinner? You managed to have your dinner?
Good. Yeah.
Perfect.
We got our power back on at was it 8?
Just
Had
after.
a power cut.
Yeah, the whole street went dead for a few hours.
Oh,
Luckily, I have many, many candles.
this does not surprise me.
So romantic. Ooh, hi, Kitty and Rory. What are you eating? Hi, Kitty Mus pudding.
So you know how name changes are really important for trans people. That's my new name. Everyone just needs to know. I'm going to change it on Facebook. I'll get a deed poll tomorrow.
We'll get you a deed poll for Christmas.
Yeah, it's like a $5 if anyone gets me for the Secret Santa.
But no, we're these are the cinnamon rolls as per tradition.
Oh,
Good. So good.
oh.
We gave one of the vegan ones to Malcolm today, but he's not going to be at Storytime. But he's eating it and thinking of us.
Malcolm, we're thinking of you and we love you and your vegan cinnamon roll. I was thinking, so bakers of the group, what if you did cinnamon buns, but you put like mincemeat in the filling, like a
Chelsea bun.
Is that a thing?
Yeah, it's basically a Chelsea bun.
A Chelsea bun.
That sounds fantastic.
Does sound fantastic. Wow. Hi, Jonathan. And hi, Ashera. Hi, Sean. Who else is there?
Hello.
Hi, Em. Hello, everybody. Oh, am I making noise? Who's that?
Oh, I have a washing machine on. I'll mute.
Yeah, it sounds like a TV show.
Oh, yes, I think it was. It did sound like a TV. Who knows? No idea. No idea. Anyway, how has everybody's day been?
Good.
Good all round?
Yeah,
Excellent.
do you have one of those days where you wake up and then you keep doing things and then you're like, what? It's almost story time? Where did the day go?
Every day of my life. Every day of my life. Hold on, it's dark in here. One second.
I've had, this is my 4th bout of story time today.
Oh,
I've been playing serious catch up.
Are you caught up?
So delighted.
I am. I literally finished just before I came on the call and I was like, I don't really know how to make Zoom work on my phone, but I'm sure it will work out fine. But if you're looking at me kind of frowning, it's because I'm like, oh, it's gone weird again.
We can't see you.
Hi, Kim.
Hey, I just realised I was muted.
How are you feeling, sweetheart?
Yeah.
Aww. Hugs. This is for you.
I managed to get COVID. Yay!
Oh, honey pie.
So yeah, it is what it is.
Storytime will see you through.
Mm-hmm.
The most potent anti-COVID device there is. We have Malcolm sometimes, and he's a doctor, so it's got to work. I had a nice day today. Can I tell you about my nice day?
Yes, please.
So it was I was working for John again today, and I had a call with him just to kind of like, this is the first call since I started on the Chivalry project, and it was just to kind of check in, and so I could say, this is what I've been looking at. Is that right? Is that what you wanted? Am I doing this right? And I told him all about it, and he was like, yes, that is right and good. You are right and good, and I am pleased. So
Yes.
Excellent.
So I was very happy. And I'm making exciting life plans for the new year.
Ooh, what plans?
Plans that involve, hopefully, maybe uprooting and changing my life a little bit.
Ooh.
And maybe having some more excitement and some more flexibility in my life and my living arrangements and where I happen to be in the world.
Are you moving into a van?
No.
Are you moving to Sheffield?
Your van. I'm moving into your van.
My van is beautiful, and I'm sure you will love each other.
You'll be very happy. Hey, Storytime. How are you doing? How are you doing? Story. Yes. I'm asking how you're doing. Just while we've got a moment, just the two of us here. You doing all right? Good to hear it. Is it story time, Okay. Bang, 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 bang. Oh no, we don't usually do the gavel on story time, do we? This is the I brought the poetry time gavel. And we're gonna have that. Bang, 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 bang. It's story time. Buckle up, motherfuckers. Right. Mute all. Okay. Now. Okay. Content warning. There is some violence in this one. I don't think I can be more specific than that. It's all going to be okay. It's going to be exciting though. Now. Are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. Chapter 24. In the lobby of an otherwise nondescript tenement near the Hudson River Docklands, Yehuda Shalman craned back his grizzled head and stared, perplexed, at an undulating metal ceiling. He was perhaps half a mile from Hester Street as the crow flies, but it had taken him nearly an hour to come this far. The path had twisted and turned, through back alleys and up fire escapes to well-travelled rooftops, across plank bridges and down again. At last he'd reached Washington Street, where he faced a baffling profusion of choices. The paths overlaid one another so that every storefront, every alley hummed with interest. He'd walked up and down the street, getting his bearings, until finally the strongest path had pulled him into the tenement with the well-lit lobby. Inside, the spell and the lights had conspired to lift his eyes upward. He could not have said how long he stood beneath the shining waves and peaks, one hand stretching to the wall for balance. At first he thought it some sort of interesting defect of the building. Perhaps the ceiling tiles had melted and begun to drip, before he realised it was a deliberate piece of art. All at once, as it had for so many other viewers, the ceiling snapped into focus. The world spun. It was dusk, and he stood on a scorched plain ringed by distant peaks. The western sun stretched his shadow narrow as a spear, turned his arms to long, gnarled branches, his fingers to twigs. Before him lay the late summer valley, its animal inhabitants beginning to wake. He blinked. And there in the empty valley appeared a beautiful palace made all of glass, its spires and ramparts shining in the last golden rays of the evening. Something hard and flat struck Shalman across the face. It was the lobby floor. He lay there, trying to regain his composure, the tile cool beneath his stinging cheek. Carefully, he levered himself up to his hands and knees. The room, thankfully, stayed put. He stood and, shielding his eyes from the ceiling, walked out of the lobby and sat on the front steps, one hand to his throbbing face. The fear he'd felt earlier, in the hallway with the pregnant woman, returned and grew. Yet another phenomenon he could not explain. He fought down his alarm and his urge to retreat to the sheltering house. He felt vulnerable, exposed. Who was his quarry? Was it this mysterious Ahmad? Or the angel of death playing with him? The pain in his swollen cheek began to dim. He made himself rise from the stoop and continue down the street. The paths danced and wove before him, pulling him toward whatever encounter awaited him next. Shortly after 1 in the morning, the golem abandoned her attempts at sewing. Distraction had made her clumsy, and the shirtwaist she'd been mending now sported a new rip in the bodice. The few waking souls who passed her window were all drunk or had to use the water closet. They only added to her restlessness and anxiety. Michael's note lay on the table, the paper deeply wrinkled from when she'd crumpled it in frustration. The wording was so unlike him, too formal by half. His usual endearments were conspicuous in their absence. Was there something he wasn't telling her? She thought of their conversation about Joseph Scholl. Had Michael run afoul of him somehow? Oh, how she hated bare words on paper. How was she supposed to know the truth without him there in front of her? There was no way to calm herself. She'd have to go to the sheltering house. He might scold her for being out alone so late at night, but she'd explain she was too concerned about him to sleep. She fastened her cloak and left, walking quickly through streets dotted with anonymous, solitary pedestrians, all in search of various forms of release. The house from the outside was dark and quiet. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, listening. A few of the men were only half asleep. The rest were sunk in an ocean of dreams, distorted reflections of their longings and fears. She inched the front door open, lifting it on its heavy hinges to keep it from creaking. The lamp was lit in Michael's office. She crept down the hallway and peered inside the half-gaping door. He had fallen asleep at his desk, slumped forward in his chair. His head lay in the crook of his arm, an open prayer book next to his elbow. He might have been dead, save for the rise and fall of his shoulders. She came closer and crouched down next to him. Why did he smell so strongly of alcohol? "Michael," she murmured. "Michael, wake up." One hand convulsed, grasping at air. He moaned and pulled himself up. "Chava," he groaned, still half asleep. And then he stiffened. His eyes flew open, found her, and focused. His terror, like that of a cornered animal, hit her square in the chest. He leapt up from the desk, scattering books and papers, and staggered backward. In his mind, she saw a grotesque image, a gigantic woman with a lumbering body and a dark, rough face, her eyes cold in their sockets. Herself, seen in the mirror of his fear. Oh, God, what had happened? She reached for him and he jolted backward again, nearly losing his footing. "Stay away from me," he hissed. "Michael," she said, but couldn't go on. So many times she'd imagined this scenario, her secret's discovery. And now she found that none of her careful explanations, her sincere apologies were near to hand. There was only horror and sadness. "Tell me I'm imagining it," he yelled. "Tell me I've gone insane." No, she realized. She couldn't. She owed him that much. But neither could she bring herself to say the truth out loud. She strained to find words that might suffice. "I never meant to hurt you," she said. "Never." A bloom of anger pushed Michael's fears aside. She saw his face harden, his hands turn to fists. She was in no true danger, of course. He was inebriated and had no skill at violence. But her senses reacted nevertheless. Reality began to bleed away into that awful calm. There was time only for one word, forced between clenched teeth. "Run," she told him. A fresh terror surged through him. And then he did as she'd ordered, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. The heavy front door slammed shut. She stood alone in Michael's office, trembling as little by little her control returned. She'd always wondered if she'd be relieved when the truth finally came out, but she would have lived with the strain forever rather than see Michael run from her. She supposed she should worry about whether he meant to tell anyone, but at the moment she cared little. Let the mob destroy her if it wanted. At least it would spare her further agony. She looked around at the chaos she'd created. Chair knocked askew, papers spread across the floor. Numbly, she pushed his chair back in place and straightened the mess. She picked up the prayer book she'd glimpsed at his elbow, and it turned into a cascade of loose, half-burned pages that spilled onto the desk. In calling forth a demon, one must be certain to know its lineage. The letter Chet is one of the alphabet's most powerful and often misapplied. She frowned. Whose book was this? She began to turn the damaged pages, skimming the meticulous directions and many-limbed diagrams. It was, she supposed, a type of cookbook, offering lists of ingredients, precise instructions, warnings against mishaps, suggestions for alterations. Except that instead of baking a chicken or a spice cake, the reader could bring about the impossible, could alter creation itself. Whatever had Michael been doing with this? Had the rabbi given it to him? One page, she noticed, was stained at the edges with mud. She read it over, and then again, and again. Stunned, trembling, she turned the page and read what was written on the reverse. Obedience, curiosity, intelligence, virtuous and modest behavior. She will make him an admirable wife if she doesn't destroy him first. And in her memory, Joseph Scholl rose before her, clutching a box of dinner rolls and smiling his secretive smile. I never doubted you would make an admirable wife. Mahmoud Saleh could not sleep, but not for the usual reasons. He'd waited long past dark to sneak into the Djinni's tenement, the key warm in his sweating hand. The Djinni had given him the key freely. He felt no guilt on that front, but neither did he wish to be labelled a squatter or a thief. He found the door, fumbled the key into the lock. Even in the near pitch dark, the room had an abandoned, empty feeling. The only light shone from the naked window, a lurid orange glow that illuminated nothing. He walked with outstretched arms, waiting to bump into a chair, a table. But soon his hands touched the far wall. A few candles sat on the still, and he felt in his overcoat's many pockets for his matches. The light revealed the room as devoid of all furniture, save a writing desk, a wardrobe, and a number of cushions scattered across the floor. He gathered the cushions together, forming a sort of mattress. When finally he laid himself down, he nearly cried at the comfort. In the morning, he would bring up a bucket of water and wash properly. For now, he would merely sleep. Or so he thought. Hours later, he had to admit that the room had defeated him. It was too quiet, too empty. But then what had he expected? A harem full of houris and a magic lamp for sleeping in? The truth was that in this neat and ordinary room, he felt an interloper, a piece of refuse blown in through the window. Resentfully, he turned over, sank further into the cushions. Damn the Djinni, he would sleep. A knock came at the door. Saleh froze in the darkness. A visitor? This late? What sort of life did that creature lead? He held his breath, willing the room to utter silence. But the knock came again, and with it quiet words in a man's voice, first in a language he didn't understand, and then in an inexpert English. Hello? Please? A pause. Ahmad? Saleh cursed. He fetched a candle and opened the door. No, Ahmad, he said, staring down at the man's dim and faraway shoes. A question in that other language, something that sounded nearer to German. He shook his head, said no again, and decided he'd done enough. Let the man work out his dilemma for himself, whatever it was. He started to close the door again. One of the man's shoes shot forward, blocking the doorframe. Saleh jumped back in alarm. The man was pushing his way into the room. Saleh shut his eyes tight and pushed back, opened his mouth to shout for help. But a cool and papery hand grabbed at his wrist, and suddenly he could make no noise at all. Charlemagne peered at the unkempt vagrant who stood rigid in front of him, candle tilted in his frozen grip. Curious, he thought. The man had brought a light to the door, but would not look at him. His first act of defense had been to close his eyes. Was he blind? Addled in some way? Charlemagne asked, "Who are you?" The man opened his mouth, moved his lips to speak, but whatever he meant to say was obscured by a thin, high, otherworldly screaming just on the edge of perception. Charlemagne ground his teeth in frustration. He knew what this meant. He'd seen cases of possession before, half a lifetime ago, in remote Prussian villages and the backwoods of Bavaria. This must be a minor instance, if the man could still speak and function, but even the most paltry demonic fragment would be an unbearable nuisance. The being would take every opportunity to get Charlemagne's attention, to beg freedom from its imprisonment. Charlemagne had even seen spirits choke their hosts with their tongues just to gain release. Unless the offender was dealt with, he'd learn nothing but nonsense. Charlemagne weighed his options. It would be quickest to exorcise the thing and be done with it, but the process was not a gentle one. The man would certainly remember it. Any chance of an unobtrusive questioning would be lost. But he was so close, so very close. And this was no venerated rabbi, but an unwashed vagrant, likely half mad from his possession. Who would believe the truth if he tried to tell it? And how could Charlemagne afford not to take the risk? He placed a hand to either side of the man's face and braced himself. Mahmoud Saleh only knew that someone, somewhere, was screaming. A hand was pushing itself into his mind, searching by feel, its fingers sliding between layers of sense and memory. Saleh could only stand rigid and dumb as it burrowed deeper, inch by inch. It paused, and then closed itself about something small and unseen, grasping it in an iron-tight fist. And then slowly, patiently, ripped it out, shrieking like a mandrake from the soil. Saleh tried to collapse, but the paper-skinned hands held him upright. The grip shifted. Long, dry fingers opened his unresisting eyes. Mahmoud Saleh looked into the man's face. He was old and thin, his pale skin mottled with age, but his deep pouched eyes burned with intelligence. A large bruise was blossoming across one cheek. He was frowning in concentration and distaste, like a surgeon elbow deep inside a man's guts. Saleh trembled in his grip. "Who are you?" asked the man. "Dr. Mahmoud," part of Saleh replied. Another part said, "Ice cream Saleh." "Then where is Ahmad?" And before Saleh could think to reply, a memory burst out of him. The Djinni passing him on the sidewalk, tossing him the key. "I'll be in the Bowery if anyone finds that they need me." Abruptly, the man let go of Saleh, and he crumpled boneless to the floor. He heard the door close as the man left. The candle rolled from his hand, its wick guttering. And the last thing Saleh thought, before the flame went out and he fell unconscious, was that it had been years since he'd seen a candle burn so brightly. The Djinni stood on a Bowery rooftop, watching the tattered crowd below. The skies had refused to deliver on their promise of rain. The thick clouds hung low and unmoving over the city like the pale underbelly of some gigantic worm. The rooftop was a patchwork of dirty mattresses, the prostitutes having moved business outdoors, hoping for a breeze. In the back of his mind sat the nagging sense that he should develop a plan that extended beyond the next quarter hour. Irritated, he pushed it away. Plans, timetables, contracts, these were all human conceits. He would do what he wished, when he wished. Was that not what he'd told Arbeely? He'd passed Conroy's earlier, had considered going inside. Perhaps he could barter his services, perform odd jobs for silver. No. Was that not still servitude of a sort? Besides, why barter at all? In the desert, the silver had simply been there for the taking. And just like that, the idea took form. He smiled, watching it grow. Why not? It would be a challenging and worthy diversion. It would require all his skill, far more than his siege of Sophia's balcony. And if there were little honour in thieving from a thief, he imagined he would feel little shame in it either. Reckless, the golem inside him said. Immoral, inexcusable. This is how I lived before you, he said. It's how I'll live again. I suppose it will entertain you sufficiently, and that's what matters. Exactly. Now go and haunt someone else. The blind and unsettled energy he'd felt earlier in the day was returning. Gladly, he gave himself over to it. If he waited and let himself examine the idea, he might find some reason to hold off. Better, far better, to hurl himself into it headlong. Saleh came to his senses on the floor of the Djinni's room. His head felt as though someone had scraped it out and used it for a mixing bowl. He lay there for a moment, trying to remember what had happened. Had he succumbed to one of his fits? No, this felt different. more akin to waking from a nightmare that had already faded, leaving him with only the body's memory of fear. Wait, no. There'd been a knock at the door. He'd answered it. In the space of a breath, the entire encounter with the stranger came crashing back. He clambered to his feet, then grabbed at the doorknob as his balance wavered. He could see again. The room was dimly lit by candles, but oh, still, when had mere shadows ever appeared so rich and full of colour? The burning flames were saturated in bright oranges and yellows and thin, flickering blues, far too bright to look at for long. The cushions he'd slept on, covered with cheap, slubbed cotton, were now masterpieces of shape and texture. He stretched out one hand, touched it with the other. It was exactly where he thought it to be. His face was warm and wet. Had he injured it in the fall? No, he was only crying. And what of his own face? Could he see it now? A mirror. He had to find a mirror. He grabbed the largest of the candles and dashed about the room. In the wardrobe, he found only a few articles of clothing, a woolen hat and, bizarrely, a rich man's silken umbrella, its handle chased in slender silver vines. He admired it for a moment before tossing it back into the wardrobe and resuming his search. What, the creature owned no mirror at all? Didn't he need to shave? Something sparkled at him from the writing desk. He brought the candle closer. Arranged on the corner of the desk was a collection of small metal figurines, perhaps a dozen all told. Before, his vision had been too poor to notice them, but now he saw birds, insects, even a tiny cobra, coiled and rearing. Next to the figurines lay a leather-wrapped set of instruments, thin awls and delicate, curved needles, such as a surgeon or dentist might use. Or, he realised, a metalsmith. He fetched the rest of the candles and set them around the figurines. Some were finished and polished to a high sheen. Others seemed to be works in progress. The snake was wonderfully done, the patterned scales a miracle of steady patience. He marvelled at the intricate tin-scrap insects, which suggested rather than described their likenesses. The long limbs and proboscis of a mantis, a beetle's round and glossy carapace. An ibis, on the other hand, looked awkward and off-balance. Something about the beak, perhaps? He picked it up and examined it. One entire side had been smoothed over, like a mistake erased in frustration. Tears pricked his eyes again. The figurines were beautiful, would have been so even if they'd not been among the first images to grace his restored sight. They were works of longing, of lonely diligence. They were nothing he'd thought their arrogant, sarcastic, terrifying maker capable of. And the old man? What business had he with the figurine's maker? Salah had been so taken with his restored senses that he'd nearly forgotten about him, but now he recalled the crushing pain, the man's obvious distaste at his task. He'd cured Salah somehow, but not out of kindness or compassion, or even the barest sense of a healer's duty. Salah had been little more than a tool to him, the flaw in his mind merely an impediment to his goal. And that goal, apparently, was to find the Djinni. Salah doubted that the man meant the encounter to be a peaceful one. He held up the unfinished ibis and watched it glint in the candlelight. A day before, an hour even, he would have gladly told the old man where to find his prey and wished him Godspeed. He put on his coat, slipped the figurine into his pocket, and blew out the candles. He would take a stroll to the Bowery, he decided, and see the world anew. And if he happened to find the Djinni along the way, then perhaps he might find it in his heart to warn him. Led by Saleh's memory, Yehuda Shalman walked east along the path of the dowsing spell. Now there were no turnings, no rooftop ascents or time-wasting detours. His quarry, it seemed, had set out for the Bowery with an arrow's unswerving aim. And what a quarry! A man called Ahmad, with a face that shone bright as a gas lamp. What was he? Some sort of demon? A victim of the same possession that had afflicted Saleh? Or perhaps its perpetrator? Fatigue was warring with Shalman's excitement, reminding him that on any other night he would be back at the sheltering house by now, claiming his much-needed hours of rest. But how could he stop now and let the trail go cold? Ignoring his tired and burning feet, he quickened his pace. He turned onto the Bowery proper and found it cluttered with men, despite the late hour. The path was so strong now it seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. He scanned the crowd, feeling a sudden panic. What if they should pass each other without Shalman noticing? A familiar sign peered down at him from the storefronts. He read the name Conroy, saw the repeated motif of sun and moon. He paused in the doorway, peered inside. No, his quarry hadn't been here. There were only a few men buying tobacco and the prim, bespectacled dealer in stolen goods. He turned from the doorway to continue his search before Conroy could notice him, and nearly ran straight into a tall, handsome man with a brightly glowing face. "I beg your pardon," the Djinni said, stepping around the slack-mouthed old man who stood rooted to the pavement. He opened Conroy's door, ringing the small bell above the doorway. Behind the register, Conroy gave him a bland smile and looked meaningfully at the other customers before returning to his well-thumbed newspaper. The Djinni busied himself pretending to scan the shelves of tobacco. It would be no challenge, he decided, to wait until Conroy locked up and then break the lock. Far more of an achievement to rob the man from under his very nose. He planned to purchase some small piece of silver and then accept the fence's customary offer of a room upstairs. He'd seen enough of the shop's comings and goings to know that there were numerous passageways from the bordello to the storefront to the alley where Conroy's men liked to congregate. He would linger in the upstairs room, and if he must take advantage of his company in the meantime, well, then he would bear it, and wait until Conroy had retired for the night. If he was careful, the toughs would be easy enough to evade. Perhaps he could create some sort of disturbance. The bell rang again above the door. It was the old man from the street, the one who'd nearly collided with him. The man was staring at him fixedly, with an almost unhinged intensity. The Djinni frowned at him. "Yes?" "Ahmad?" the man asked. The Djinni cursed silently. The other customers had paid and were leaving the tiny shop. Since this man, whoever he was, somehow knew his name, the Djinni would have to wait for him to leave as well. "Do I know you?" he asked in English, but the man shook his head. Less an answer than an injunction against speaking, as though the Djinni would ruin the moment. Conroy traded a glance with the Djinni, folded his paper away. "Can I help you?" Conroy asked. The old man waved Conroy away, as one would an irritating fly. Then he smiled at the Djinni, and it was a smile both sly and triumphant, the smile of an imp with a secret to tell. He raised a hand, and with 2 fingers beckoned him closer. Growing intrigued despite himself, the Djinni took a step toward the man. It was then that he began to feel it. a stirring along the backs of his arms and the nape of his neck. A strange buzzing began inside his mind. One of his hands began to shake. It was the cuff. It was vibrating. He paused. Something here was very, very wrong. With a claw-like hand, the old man reached out and grabbed the Djinni around the wrist. What William Conroy saw in the moment before every pane of glass in the shop shattered, including his own spectacles, was something that he would never tell anyone. Not the police, not the men in his employ, not even the priest to whom he made his confession every Thursday. In that bare instant, he saw the two figures transformed. Where the thin old man had been, there stood another, naked, with a sun-blasted face beneath filthy wisps of hair. And where the man he knew as Ahmad had been, there stood something that was no man, no earthly creature at all, but a kind of shimmering vision, like the air above the pavement on a scorching summer day, or a candle flame whipped by the wind. Chapter 25. At the instant of contact, a hidden lake of memory burst its banks. It flooded their minds and overwhelmed them both, drowning them in images, sensations, impressions. Where before there had been a gap in the Djinni's memory, describing the bare moment between the sight of a hawk wheeling about in a blood-red sunset and coming to on Arbeely's dusty workshop floor, now there lay weeks, months full of time. He watched a young Bedouin girl as she glimpsed his palace shining in the valley, and then he watched himself enter her dreams. He saw himself visit the girl again and again, noticed his own growing fascination with her. He saw, as he never could have before, how the days between their visits passed so quickly for himself and so slowly for her. Saw the signs that the girl's perception of dream and reality were sliding perilously into each other. He watched, unable to look away, as he entered her mind one last time. He felt her draw him eagerly down, and how little he'd protested, into her imagined wedding, felt the lust that blinded him to the danger, and then the panic of her waking, and the jagged, terrifying pain as he ripped himself from her mind. He saw himself hovering near obliteration. He watched as he turned away from the cries of her family and ran to the safe haven of his own glass palace. And then he saw what followed. The day was fading little by little, reaching towards sunset. Above the parapets of his glass palace, the Djinni noticed the changing angle of the sun with irritation. It was nearly a week since his last catastrophic visit to the Bedouin girl, and still he was not healed. He'd spent his daytime hours since then hanging motionless in the sunlight, allowing the heat to knit him back together. But at night he retreated back inside, where the glass would protect him. The nights irked him now. His tattered wounds itched, turned him impatient and bad-tempered. A few more days of healing and he would be strong enough for his long-delayed trip to his fellow Djinn and the habitations of his birth. Why had he not gone earlier? He'd grown far too fascinated with humans, allowing himself to be lured into complacency and danger. He couldn't think of Fadwa now without cringing at his own innocence. Not that he blamed the girl for what had happened. No, the fault lay entirely with himself. He'd been far too taken with her, too impressed by the tenacity with which she and her people clung to the desert, fighting for every stalk of grain and drop of milk. He'd mistaken fortitude for wisdom and failed to see that she lacked a certain maturity of intellect. Well, his lesson had been learned. Possibly he'd allow himself to observe an occasional caravan from afar, but as for the rest of it, he was finished. No more dallying with humans. The Djinn elders had been right. The two people were not meant to interact. No matter how fascinating, how sensual, the cost of these encounters was too high for comfort. From the safety of his palace, the Djinni watched as the fading light bred shadows across the walls. Perhaps he thought he would wait a few extra days before setting out on his journey. He wanted no wounds or scars to remain of his misadventure. No one would know how close he'd come to his own destruction. Help! He turned, startled. A voice from far away drifted through the glass wall. Djinni, help! We are at battle with a band of Ifrits and are injured. We need shelter. Up he flew to the highest tower and looked out over the valley. Sure enough, 3 Djinn were approaching from the west, riding the wind. At this distance he couldn't recognize them, but they were unmistakably his own kind. There was no sign of their pursuers, but that was unsurprising. Many Ifrits like to travel beneath the desert's surface, outdistancing their enemies and then bursting forth in front of them. One of the Djinn he saw seemed to be carrying another, who indeed looked less than whole. You are welcome here, he called to them. Enter quickly and take your shelter. He felt a pang that they would see him in this weakened state, but then they themselves were no better. Perhaps they could all keep each other's secrets. The gateway to the palace was shielded by a door of thick glass that hung on silver hinges. To open or close it, the Djinni had to be in human form. It had been a conceit of his to pretend he was a human ruler of old, coming home to his seat of power. As he removed the bar that locked the door and swung it open, he reflected that perhaps it was time to modify the gateway. What had once seemed an amusing fancy now felt, in the presence of his own kind, faintly embarrassing. A hot wind caressed him at the gateway, and the 3 Djinn flew past him and into the palace. One of them, a female he saw now, a Djinniya of some beauty, supported by another of her fellows. He smiled to himself. The evening had just grown slightly more promising. He closed the door and then hefted the bar back into place. A claw-like human hand clamped a metal cuff over his wrist. Shocked, he tried to pull away, but his arm had turned to frozen fire. The pain was blinding. Desperately, he tried to change shape, to get away from the freezing iron, but to no effect. He could feel the cuff holding his body in place, blocking every attempt to transform. The pain moved past his shoulder to envelop his entire being. He collapsed to his knees, looked up with his dimmed human eyes at the Djinni that had done this to him. But all 3 Djinn had vanished. Standing before him was a Bedouin tribesman carrying a young girl in his arms. The girl was Fadwa, bound and blindfolded. Next to them stood something that he first took for an animated corpse, but then he saw it was a grotesque old man in a filthy, tattered cloak. The old man was grinning hideously, showing dark and broken teeth. "It is accomplished," he said. "Captured, and in human form. The first since the days of Suleiman." "Then he's bound to you?" asked the Bedouin. "No, not quite yet. For that, I'll need your assistance." The tribesman hesitated for a moment and then lowered his cloak-covered burden to the floor. The Djinni, unable to move or even to speak against the freezing agony, watched as Fadwa twitched and whispered. The Bedouin noticed his gaze. "Yes, look," he shouted. "Look at what you've done to my daughter. This is your payment, creature." However terrible your suffering, know that you yourself have caused it, and it is nothing compared to hers. Yes, well put, said the ancient man dryly. Now come and help me before the pain unhinges him. I want him fully aware of what's happening. Cautiously, the Bedouin approached. Hold him steady, the old man said. Fadwa's father grabbed the Djinni roughly. The Djinni tried to cry out, but nothing came. Hold still, the Bedouin hissed, gripping the back of the Djinni's neck. The old man had closed his eyes. He was muttering under his breath, as though rehearsing or preparing himself, making ready. Then he knelt down and put one rough and dusty palm on the Djinni's forehead. The rasping syllables the old man chanted made no sense, but even through the iron's torment he could sense the net of glowing lines that spun out from the man's hand and around his own pain-racked body. He strained against the cuff, panicking, trying desperately to change form as the lines twisted to form a cage. Foolish, careless, baited and captured like the basest of ghouls. Everything had been stolen from him. I am Wahab ibn Malik, the man growled, and I bind you to my service. And the cage of glowing lines sank inside him, flame joining to flame. The old man staggered. For a moment it seemed he might faint. Then he righted himself and smiled in triumph. Then it's done? Asked the Bedouin. You can heal her now. One last thing. The binding must be sealed. The wizard smiled sadly. My deepest apologies, Abu Yusuf, but here our agreement ends. A knife appeared in the wizard's other hand. In a swift and powerful motion, he plunged it into Abu Yusuf's ribs. There was a horrible gasping noise. And then, as the wizard withdrew the knife, a hot spray of blood and the choking smell of iron. Abu Yusuf collapsed, his hand slipping from the Djinni's neck. The wizard took a deep breath. Again, he seemed exhausted. His skeletal frame sagged with fatigue, but his eyes were full of a quiet triumph. Now, he said, let us talk. But first... He grabbed the Djinni's wrist again and muttered something over the iron cuff. In an instant, the pain vanished. Freed from his paralysis, the Djinni fell, sprawling across the blood-stained glass. I'll give you a moment, said the old man. He turned his back to check on the girl, who lay bundled on the floor, oblivious to her father's murder. The Djinni gathered himself, rose shaking to his feet, and launched himself at the wizard. Stop, Ibn Malik said. And just like that, the Djinni jerked to a halt, a tamed animal at the end of its leash. There was no way to fight it. He might as well stop the sunrise. The wizard whispered a few words, and the iron's freezing torture roared back to life. The wizard said, Do you know that no one, not even the wisest of the seers, has discovered why the touch of iron is so terrible to the Djinn? He paused as though awaiting a response, but the Djinni was near insensible, curled around his arm. The wizard went on. Nothing else produces such an effect. But here lies a conundrum, for if I can control you with iron, then so can another. It's no use to send one's most powerful slave to kill an enemy, only to see him driven away by an ordinary sword. I pondered this problem long and hard, and this is my solution. He muttered the words again, and once more the cuff's torment ceased. I will be a stern master, the wizard said as the Djinni lay boneless on the floor, but not a cruel one. You will only feel the iron if you deserve its touch. If, however, your attitude merits a reward, I'll allow you to resume your true form from time to time. But don't think you can escape. Your actions are mine to control. You are bound to me, fire to flesh, soul to soul, and sealed in blood for as long as you shall live. He smiled down at the Djinni. Oh, my proud slave. We'll outdo all the stories of old, you and I. Our names shall be sung for generations. I'll destroy myself, said the Djinni in a hoarse voice. The wizard raised an eyebrow. I see the truth of your position has yet to set in, he said. Very well. I'll make it clear to you. The Djinni braced weakly against the expected pain of the iron, but it didn't come. Instead, Ibn Malik went to Fadwa and crouched over her. The girl had thrashed free of her cloak. A dribble of saliva ran down one side of her face, and her hands jerked and clawed against their bonds. You left a piece of yourself inside this girl, the wizard said. I promised her father I would remove it. He placed his hands on the girl's face, slipping his fingers beneath the blindfold. Closing his eyes, the man began to mutter. After a moment, Fadwa went still. And then she screamed, a sound that went on and on, as though her soul was being drawn from her body. The Djinni shuddered, tried to cover his ears, but found he couldn't move. At last the screaming ceased, and the girl lay motionless. Ibn Malik smiled, though he looked even more tired than before. He slipped off the blindfold, untied the rag that bound her wrists, and backed away. Go to her, Ibn Malik told the Djinni. Wake her. He had no strength left, but nevertheless his limbs carried him of their own accord to Fadwa's side. The binding moved his legs, made him kneel down and gently shake her shoulder. Fadwa, he said, struggling against it. Don't wake, he thought. Don't see. The girl stirred, brought one hand up to rub at her eyes, then winced at the ache in her wrists. The last of the twilight was shining through the palace walls, casting a blue aura around her wan and drawn features, turning her hair a deep blue-black. Her eyes opened. She saw the Djinni. It's you, she murmured. I'm dreaming. No, I was dreaming. She frowned, confused. Slowly, she sat up and looked around. Father! The girl shrieked. And then the binding was moving him again, making him crouch above her as Ibn Malik had. His hands went around her throat. He felt the delicate bones as they bent and cracked under his fingers, felt her hands as they scratched and slapped at his face. He could not look away from her eyes as they stared back at him, protesting in disbelief before they bulged with panic, and then, finally, dimmed. At last the Djinni sat back. His hands still moved with the binding's command, convulsing against air. He watched them until they stopped. Now you understand, said Ibn Malik. And it was true. He understood. He stared at the cold glass walls and tried to feel nothing. The wizard put a hand on his shoulder. Enough for today, I think, he said. Rest and regain your strength. Tomorrow your true work begins. He paused to look about at the cavernous hall. You must prepare yourself for one more disappointment, I fear. Your new quarters are not nearly so elegant. From his tattered cloak he extracted a long-necked copper flask, etched with intricate loops and whorls. He tipped the flask towards the Djinni and muttered another series of harsh and meaningless words. A bright flash seared the Djinni's eyes, lighting the chamber to translucence. There was a horrible sense of diminishment as the wizard's spell gathered and compressed his being, banking his essence to the merest spark. Slowly, the flask drew him in, and time slowed to an elongated instant, full of the taste of metal and a wild, searing anguish. Here the Djinni's own memories ended. But these were not the only memories that he regained in that moment, for the lines of the binding stretched both ways. The Djinni saw himself, remembered what he had done, but he also saw the memories of the wizard Ibn Malik, felt his triumph as he enslaved the Djinni and with Abu Yusuf's blood and compelled him to kill Fadwa. Like two patterns overlaid, their recollections ran together and diverged, overlapped and intertwined. He was inside the flask, trapped in that endless moment, and he was standing alone in the glass palace, holding a copper flask that was warm to the touch. Ibn Malik replaced the flask inside the pocket of his cloak. Then he staggered to the nearest wall and sank to the floor, breathing in shallow gasps. The day's exertions had drained him more deeply than expected. He hadn't meant to put the Djinni in the flask so quickly, but it would have done little for his authority to allow the Djinni to see him panting with fatigue. And still, what a day! What an unparalleled accomplishment! He only regretted the death of the girl. It seemed wasteful to kill one so young and beautiful when she might have served as a menial in his future palace, or a tempting motivation for Djinni's good behaviour. He should have anticipated that, like any powerful animal, his new acquisition would require a certain amount of breaking. His breathing began to even and slow. He would, he decided, take a small, well-deserved rest and then return home. The Bedouins' mounts were hobbled safely outside the palace, and it was a clear, warm night with no windstorms. The mounts could wait a little longer. Or perhaps he would leave them behind and command the Djinni to carry him across the valley. He smiled at the thought and sank into a deep and grateful sleep. Ibn Malik did not usually dream, but within moments his slumbering mind brought him visions of a city on an island, an impossible city that reached far into the sky. Perhaps it was the city that he would build, he and the Djinni? Yes, a monumental undertaking, but was it not within his reach? For now that he had captured one Djinni, who was to say that he could not capture another and another? He would bind the entire race and make them build him a kingdom to rival Suleiman's. The city blurred, coalesced, and became a man, a wrinkled old man with skin pale as milk, carrying a stack of singed parchments. Ibn Malik had never encountered such a man before, and yet he felt he knew him, felt both kinship and a dreadful fear. He wanted to warn the man, but of what? And now the man was reaching out towards Ibn Malik, his face full of warning as well. Pain, sudden and horrible, cut through the dream. The pale man's face disintegrated as Ibn Malik woke with his own knife in his stomach and Abu Yusuf's hand on the hilt. Either Abu Yusuf had been biding his time, or he'd been revived by his daughter's screams. In either case, he wasn't nearly as dead as he'd appeared. A wide trail of blood showed his slow progress to Ibn Malik's side. Now he lay next to the wizard, twisting the knife with the last of his strength. Ibn Malik roared and backhanded the man, but it was too late. The damage was done. Abu Yusuf had pulled the knife away with him. Ibn Malik's vision blurred. Blood filled his mouth. He spat it out and hauled himself to standing. Abu Yusuf lay at his feet, smiling weakly. The wizard pressed a foot to his neck until there could be no question the man was dead. Beneath the taste of blood, Ibn Malik could smell the meaty stink of his own intestines. Grimacing, he ripped a length of cloth from his cloak and stuffed it into the hole in his belly. Stomach wounds corrupted quickly. He would need herbs and fire, needle and thread. He thought of the Djinni and cursed. Weakened and wounded like this, he had no strength to conjure his servant from the flask. The effort alone might kill him. The horse. He had to get to Abu Yusuf's horse. He staggered to the palace gate and struggled to lift the bar away, ignoring the feel of his insides shifting. At last the gate was open. He found the stallion and untied it, leaving the pony behind. He hauled himself onto the horse's back, smearing its side with his blood. He tried to kick it into a gallop. The horse, feeling only a gentle nudge, began a slow and jarring trot. Go, you stinking bag of bones, thought Ibn Malik, but it was all he could do to lace his fingers into the mane and hang weakly on. He'd made it halfway across the valley when the jackals descended. Frenzied by the smell of blood, they ignored the horse's kicks and pulled Ibn Malik screaming from its side. With the last dregs of his energy, he fought a few of them off. The rest, sensing his exhaustion, vaulted the charred bodies of their packmates and tore out his throat. For all the wizard's strength and power, the jackals found he made rather a small meal.
Hooray! I guess.
Oh, way to go.
It's nice.
Okay.
Happy weekend!
Oh,
I'm so pleased that vengeance was so swift.
Yeah.
Everybody okay?
Some excrement hitting some air moving equipment there.
that was dramatic as fuck.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
Ramsey Bolt.
Gross. Gross, that was gross. Thanks, Helene, that was gross. Ugh. So, what do we think? What's going on?
Everyone's having a really bad day.
Except Salah.
Apart from Salah.
Salah's having a very good day.
Oh yeah, that's true. Hooray for Salah!
Yay, Salah!
I feel a bit sorry for the Djinni that he can't kill his enslaver person. But that's the only time I've ever felt sorry for the Djinni.
He had it coming.
Yeah.
I reckon Salah's going to have some ice cream to celebrate having such a good day.
Make ice cream. Like he could only start making ice cream when he got possessed. So I think he's going to ice cream ability.
I think he's never going to want to see ice cream ever again in his life.
Would anyone be willing to explain their theories about wibbly wobbly, timey wimey, Shalman and Malik, like connecting? Like what was that about?
Because they're clearly very similar people.
Mm-hmm.
Was there like a summoning though, or a reincarnation, or?
Oh, Frankie knows.
Typical Frankie. Knowing things. Yeah.
Was it like the wizard that got to Shalman in his dream when he was like, "Oh my god, I'm damned,"
That's what I was wondering. And then he was like, you should be here.
Was it the act of
that's
binding
the
that kind of fused them together a bit? Is that what we think?
Maybe the whole thing's just a dream. Like the entire book is just a dream.
The last line of this story is Rotfeld woke up and it was all a dream. He decided to turn over a new leaf, stop trying to be such a pickup artist, and like learn how to respect and speak to normal women.
But another golem on a rampage found him on his way out the door and killed him just to be safe, and somebody else
exactly
stopped that golem's rampage.
Exactly. Yeah. He went to Shalman, bought a bride. Shalman made the golem. The golem immediately murdered both of them, and then she lived in the little shack in the woods and became like a folk healer to the villagers of the surrounding region.
I like that version.
Yeah.
Maybe you should write it next time.
Yeah.
Maybe I should. It would be a much shorter book.
Does anyone think that the Djinni is going to end up as a doctor? Because he seemed proper fascinated with like the doctor when the woman died, and then maybe he's going to like decide to make up for all his like evilness in his life by like becoming a doctor.
Yeah, like Salah did mention that like I couldn't help noticing the bit where it talks about his like tinsmith tools, where initially Salah's like merchant's tools or something like that kind of fine work. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that.
Did anybody catch the bit where the callback to the destruction thing? Do you remember when the golem had been like I'll never hurt anybody, I'll destroy myself first, and the Djinni at the time was like, I can't believe you just said that. I would literally never ever say that. I would never. And he was like, I'll destroy myself. Oh, Ahmad.
But that was before he had to try to not feel anything anymore.
That's true.
And I think he tried very hard and succeeded.
It didn't sound like he felt...
Up until he started feeling stuff again accidentally because of the golem.
It sounds like he wasn't feeling an awful lot of stuff when he was like damaging that Bedouin woman.
I'm just going to say it's very effective conditioning, isn't it? Really.
God, that was rough.
Did the Djinni forgot he'd said that? Because it's been like thousands of years since he said it.
It's true. I forget things after a much shorter time than that.
I really love the bit when the Djinni's looking back on it too, and is like, oh man, what did he think about himself? That he was so innocent and that he didn't recognize her lack of maturity or something like that. And I'm like, oh yeah, older guy dating a younger woman trying to take responsibility, but then saying she just wasn't mature enough. And I was so
When he's like, not that he blamed her. It's like, yeah, no fucking shit.
Yeah. Libertarian Djinni continues to be extremely libertarian, especially with regard to age difference and power dynamics.
Katie, what's that?
Yep.
It's fabric which isn't shiny but looks shiny, and it's really confusing.
It just looks shiny.
It looks almost like the poured marble or poured paint type stuff.
It looks like a desert seen from above.
Ooh.
Have you made that?
Below.
Have you made that, Katie? Have you been like doing punctualism on it? Or?
No, I have not. I bought it on the internet. But I'm making pretty things with it.
What are you making?
You will see in the fullness of time.
Is it a tiny blanket?
Do we have to wait another 4 years?
No, you don't. Because I have Nick to help me with this one.
2 years.
Yes. Oh, we should say goodbye to the catch-up crew. Goodbye, catch-up crew. Gordon isn't going to watch this because he's reading along, but let's send some love to Gordon anyway. Gordon, here is some love.
Gordon, we love you.
Who else is going to be in the? Who else isn't here?
Ariane.
I am.
Martin and Ariane.
Malcolm, has Malcolm been catching up?
Malcolm. Yay.
Bina?
All of the catch-up crew. Bina. Shout out to
I know it's weird because I'm here, but I'm gonna watch this back. So can we send some love to me as well?
So much love to you.
She's gonna be so happy in a couple of days.
I love this. Would anybody else like? You don't have to watch this back. Would anybody else like some love sending to their future selves?
I'm pretty high, and I'm probably gonna have to watch this back. So if you want to give me love, that would be fine.
Kitty.
Yeah, I can't
Me. Pick me.
Oh.
Thanks, Lisa.
Okay. Sorry, that was.
That'll be great.
Bye to the ketchup crew. Goodbye, ketchup crew. Goodbye.